welcome to Education USA Virtual Week. Education USA is your official source of US higher education information. This week-long webinar series brought you 10 live virtual sessions on different topics to help you prepare for study in the USA and featured more than 20 expert US admissions specialists and Education USA advisors. My name is Katie Sleeman, and I am an Education USA coordinator in Auckland, New Zealand. I have the pleasure of kicking off our last session of the week, a live Q&A with Education USA advisors from Australia and New Zealand. If you are tuning in live, we encourage you to post your questions on our Slido page by going to www.sli.do and entering the session code you see at the bottom of this screen. First, I would like to introduce our Education USA team that's here with us today. Charles Hornstra is a Regional Educational Advising Coordinator, or REAC, based in Bangkok, Thailand. Samantha Jackson is a Country Coordinator based in Melbourne, Australia. Sarah Zamanzadeh is a Country Coordinator based in Sydney, Australia. And Ron Mitchell is an Education Advisor based in Wellington, New Zealand. We have an excellent team ready to answer all of your questions on all things study in the USA, but I might go ahead and kick us off with the very first one that's popped up on our Slido page here. And keep in mind, there's a range of things that you can ask us about today, but just to get us going here, what are the major differences in studying in the US versus studying in Australia or New Zealand? So I might ask Sarah to get us going with some thoughts on that one.
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks so much, Katie, and hi, everyone. That is a really, really great question. While university systems in all countries, especially Australia, New Zealand, and the US are brilliant, there are some important differences to note. One of the differences when we're looking at Australia versus the US is a bachelor degree in Australia is 3 years versus a bachelor degree in the United States is 4 years. Another important difference is that the US tends to take a bit of a liberal art approach in some degrees or in some colleges, which allows students to explore a variety of subjects before they select a major. Here in Australia, and it may be similar in New Zealand, students have to declare straight away, so they don't necessarily have that flexibility to just explore different options. And my favourite difference, which makes me regret not going to a university in the US, is in the US, most students will live on campus, creating a community lifestyle within the university itself. Here in Australia, and Katie can enlighten us about New Zealand, students commute to campus. So you don't get the same lifestyle and on-campus feeling, which is a big difference.
Awesome, thanks, Sarah. Ron, do you have anything to chime in about some of the differences between studying in New Zealand versus studying in the US?
Yeah, I think some of the differences are quite similar to what Sarah has shared, the bachelor degree in New Zealand typically being 3 years rather than 4. I think another thing, particularly for New Zealand students to be aware of, is that the universities across New Zealand are largely similar to each other, whereas across the United States, there's a huge range of different types of institutions. There are public and private institutions. Some of them have very small student bodies of maybe less than 1,000 students. Others are huge and have student populations of over 60,000. So there is a huge variety of different types of universities in the United States.
That's a really good segue, I think, to talking about one of the next questions that's popped up here. And it's kind of alluding to the whole structure of the US degree system. And for this one, I might ask Charles to answer, but it's about the purpose of credit hours and what that means in the US system and how that really translates. Are you okay to have a go at that question?
Sure. So for credit hours, usually a typical college or university course is 3 credits. And students, in order to take a full course load for that semester average between, well, usually it's around 15 credits per semester. In certain cases, it can range between 12 to 15. You need to keep in mind that some schools will work on a semester system, some are on a trimester system. So you need to check with your institution to see how your academic year is divided for semesters. But for classes, you will also need to take credit hours in your core curriculum classes. So those are your humanities courses, your general science courses, mathematics, being able to knock out core requirements that are required for that program or for that institution. And then as you advance to your sophomore, junior, senior year, your second, third, and fourth year, you'll start to focus your academics more on what you're actually majoring in. So for your first year on campus, a lot of times you'll be in larger lectures and knocking out the core requirement classes and getting those credits checked off on the list of courses that you need to take so that you're on track for graduation.
That's perfect. Thanks so much with that. We've got a number of questions coming through about standardized testing that I'm seeing. So first, I think we should tackle what is standardized testing. When you hear about SAT and ACT, what does that mean? What does that look like? And then we'll delve into a little bit of the timelines associated with those. So Samantha, can I bring you into the conversation to talk a little bit about standardized testing?
Sure, thanks, Katie. When you start looking at researching for your US colleges, a lot of those colleges are going to require you to also provide a standardized test score. That can either be an SAT or an ACT. Schools don't have a preference on which ones they receive, but generally the structure of those tests, and let's talk about the SAT first, it will have an English component of that test, a math component of that test, and an optional essay as part of that test. It goes for about 3 hours, and it's not too dissimilar to the ACT. The only difference with the ACT test is it also has a science component of that test as well. So as a student, if you're required to give those results as part of your application, you could practice and see which one you liked the most. And again, it also depends on what your criteria are and why you want to go to a US college. If you want to be a student athlete at an NCAA institution, you will have no choice but to do one of those tests because it's part of the eligibility component. Now, obviously, the landscape is a little bit different this year, and sometimes those rules and regulations will change. But there is a lot more US colleges going test optional where you're not required to do those SATs or ACTs at all. There is a wonderful website that we will share on our Facebook page at the end, which will list that test optional site, which lists all the US colleges that don't require that. There is a lot of talk about the SAT and the ACT having biases, and more US colleges are not relying on that to seek your admittance. However, a lot of US colleges may not require it for admissions, but if you need some funding at their institutions, they may require that. So it really is an interesting element of if it is or if it isn't. We suggest that within your planning, you cannot take this the first time until year 11 in Australia. I believe that's year 12 in New Zealand. And we recommend that you take it at least 2 to 3 times because they can be super scored. So any sections of those tests can be, you could have a bad English day when you take it in November, but an excellent day when you take it the following March. So they can combine your English score from one test and your math score from the other, and that's what gets sent to the testing agencies and maybe to the schools that you apply to. Your SAT results will not be sent to the schools unless you apply to those institutions and request that your scores are sent. So I think that's probably enough to start us on that path. And I'll throw back to Charlie, who is going to add one additional comment, I believe.
Sure, and I was just going to say the super score is a great point to make, Samantha, but also for students that are looking at schools that maybe their SAT or ACT scores are not required, so the school is test optional. If you are interested in applying for financial aid at that school or going for scholarships at that school, just keep in mind that yes, maybe for admission, it's not required, but in many cases, to be eligible for that financial aid, to be eligible to be at least in the running for scholarships, obviously it's not guaranteed, but to be competitive for those, you may have to take those tests and submit those scores. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at institutions and applying. Yes, you might not need it for admissions, but you may need it for scholarship. Thank you.
And then the final thing I'll add is that there is a really wonderful online free tool called the Khan Academy for the SAT. And it has a whole lot of practice tests and questions, and you can take yourself through those with self-learning. And if you see that there's gaps in your own knowledge base, perhaps it is in math and perhaps it is in geometry, go and talk to your math teachers on your school sites as well. And again, like the SAT, the ACT has similar resources on their website as well. So that's all from me, Katie, and I'll hand it back.
That's great, thank you. I think that there's so much that we can talk about when it comes to standardized testing, because it is a lot to take in when you're thinking about going to the US, and you all gave some great comments there. I just wanted to reiterate from the New Zealand perspective that we don't encourage you to wait until the last minute. So we typically advise students to be thinking and planning to take either the SAT or the ACT in year 12 for New Zealand. And if you would like to take it again, aim for year 13. But don't wait until the very last year, your last semester of your last year of school to just be starting taking the standardized test. Because when you see admissions deadlines coming from the institutions, those are firm deadlines, which means that you need to have all of the pieces of the application puzzle together when you're submitting to apply to those institutions, including SAT or ACT scores as well. So with that, I think I might actually shift us over to our next slide here about application components. And hopefully you can see some of those on this screen as well, but we're getting some questions here about what is the admissions timeline and what are the parts of the application to consider. So I might bring Sarah back in to talk a little bit about the admissions process.
Thanks so much, Katie. Yeah, so as everyone can see on the slide or presentation screen at the moment, there are many things that factor into a US application, which is quite different from here in Australia. Here in Australia, and again, I'll let New Zealand comment on New Zealand afterwards, we just need to get the highest mark. And if you get the highest mark, you get into essentially the course you want to get into. Some universities are changing, but most still follow that format. In the US, they take a holistic approach. So they do look at your grades. Yes, you do still need to achieve high scores, and they do look at that standardized test, and hopefully you can achieve high scores in that as well. However, that's the start of the conversation. So once you've achieved high scores or good scores in your high schooling and in your SAT or ACT, it gets you into the pile that the university will then look at. Then they also look at things like a written essay. They'd like to understand who a student is and why that student would like to come to the university. They look at recommendation letters from your teachers and from your careers advisor. And then they're also looking at any extracurricular activities or any leadership you have outside your schooling. So it is quite different from our application here in Australia, and it does take a lot of time, but I recommend students plan quite early on. Usually our year 11 here is when you should start this process and start talking to your teachers. And then in year 12, you should really get everything together ready to apply. You don't want to leave it, as with the SAT, until the last minute because of all the components. And the one that I did miss out, which is on the slide, is the financial aid / scholarship. That is also part of the university application. So usually you will indicate in your application to the university whether you're looking for financial aid or scholarship.
Perfect. Thank you, Sarah. As was mentioned in another session, deadlines can change significantly when you're looking at applying to institutions in the US. And I know Charlie has some things to add about the admissions process as well, but I want to throw in there one of the questions that we received about early decision and what that means and how that impacts other institutions that you might be applying to. So over to you, Charles.
Sure. So there's the difference between early decision and early action. Decision is binding. So that's kind of like you're looking for the U.S. institution that you are really set on. It is if they said yes to you, that is the school that you want to go to. And therefore, you can apply at an earlier date for that school and also find out earlier. So the benefit of that is being able to allow you to have a earlier timeline for finding out admission. But however, any other school that you're applying to, you would not be able to select the same option of applying as an early decision applicant, because if you're accepted to your early decision school, that would bind you to that school and you would give up your offers for the others. One thing that I want to note on the financial assistance and scholarship is that, and this is just kind of piggybacking off of what Sarah has mentioned, if there are additional essays for scholarship applications, you should definitely fill those out. There's no guarantee that you're going to get a scholarship. However, if you don't try or if you don't submit the application, you do have a 0% chance of getting it. So it's worth trying and putting your name in the running, and being able to showcase what is special about your application and you and attending that institution. And you never know if there's going to be additional funding that comes out of that, because it will pay off in the long run. Back to you, Katie, or over to Samantha.
And I guess the one thing I'd like to add for especially our Australians and New Zealanders is that the advantage of perhaps using something like early action, you have, there's no limit on how many schools you can apply to, but inevitably they'll give you the decision December of your senior year of high school. So if you're applying, let's just pretend you're all in year 12 this year, you would apply to go to your college next year. You'd put your application in about November. They would give you your decisions around December. That means you can be sitting there with your Australian or your New Zealand offers, with your US offers, and really comparing apples versus apples. There is nothing wrong with using the regular decision timeline, but the complexity with that is that the timelines, the decisions are all released on April 1, which is often after our universities starting in our own countries. You cannot really start in an Australian and a New Zealand institution and expect that you can still take on your offer. So if this is all new information to you, that's okay. Just reach out to us at EducationUSA and we can help you further. Thanks, Katie.
Great, good answers, everyone. Thank you. We have some more questions about standardized testing coming through, and this one is actually in regards to the ACT, and I'm so glad you asked about it, because I think just because the SAT, at least from the New Zealand perspective, there's more opportunities and more testing centers in the country. We don't get asked as frequently about ACT in its own right. So I'd like to put that out there about more information about what the ACT is. And this question was from a student who was wondering if because there's a science component as part of the ACT, is that a better fit for them? So would anyone like to raise your hand if you'd like to respond to that one?
So Katie, I'll come back in on. What's interesting about the ACT is that if you're an analytical math number person, they do say that the ACT may be incredibly well suited for you. Now, when we say it has a science section, they're not really asking you science-specific questions. They're really asking you about analytical spatial questions. So if you think that that's your bag and that's how you best operate, then obviously the ACT might be a really good fit. And if that's the case, then you might have to work really hard in your in-country locations. And that's why we say practice doing an ACT test, practice doing an SAT test, and you'll be able to work out if it actually is a good fit. But they do say for analytical thinkers, and if you're good at that spatial awareness, then that could be a really well-suited test for you.
Perfect. Cheers, Samantha. I want to throw us back to the financial aid conversation. We have a few questions about what is a scholarship? How do I get a scholarship? What does that look like from the institution's perspective? Ron, are you okay to chime in about some topics on financial aid?
Sure, thanks, Katie. So I think maybe the first thing to remember about financial aid is that the university that you're heading to is usually going to be the best source of information about financial aid opportunities for you. And different universities will have different opportunities for international students in terms of financial aid. So financial aid can take a number of different forms. We hear a lot about sports scholarships, and they do offer some students some excellent opportunities for financial aid, but they're by no means the only option for financial aid to attend university in the US. There are also other types of scholarships and grants available that are determined based on merit, based on a particular talent that you have, based on community service activities that you may have been involved in. So there are a really wide range of different types of financial aid that may be available. And this can also vary depending on whether you're applying to a public or a private institution. They will have different opportunities available to international students. So I would open that up to my colleagues to add some more details on that.
I could jump in and just say that for merit-based scholarships, oftentimes, well, it depends on the institution, whether it's a certain SAT, ACT/GPA that you must have in order to qualify for a merit-based scholarship at that institution. Others are more of an application approach where you actually need to apply for the scholarship. It would possibly include essays. It would possibly include letters of recommendation, similar to a university application. Some of them are institutional scholarships, meaning they're coming from the institution that you're applying to. Other times you can look for third-party scholarships. Maybe it could be a scholarship in your home country or a government-sponsored scholarship. Or it could just be a completely third-party scholarship from an organization or company that has a philanthropic arm to it, and it's something that you can apply for. The key thing about scholarships is it's money that does not need to be paid back, whereas a loan or other forms of financial aid that are loan-based would need to be paid back. So it's great to apply for scholarships and grants because that is money that once you are selected for it, you can then apply towards your tuition and not have to worry about paying that money back at the end.
That's spot on. Thank you. And I think Samantha might have another word or two to add about scholarships.
And as Charlie already touched on, you can always scholarship bank. So although the institution you are applying to may give you one form of scholarship, you can always bank as long as you only get to the 100% limit. US colleges won't let you go over 100%. And also the looking for scholarships can happen during your whole 4 years, okay? So you may be able to build up to greater scholarships or merit-based award on the success that you're doing as a student while on campus as well. Thanks, Katie.
Cheers, everyone. We do have a couple of questions specifically about completing financial aid forms for institutions. And I think those questions, we hear you, we see you. I think I might just throw up a slide with our contact details for your specific Education USA office so that you can follow up with education advisors directly for those questions for some additional assistance. if that's all right. But I'd like to move on to just talking about an overview of the difference in types of institutions across the US. And this is a question that I get all of the time. So what is the difference between public institutions and private institutions? Can you really tell the difference when you're actually on those campuses? What's the real deal with that? And I think I'm gonna throw that one to Sarah.
Sure, thanks so much, Katie. Yeah, so there is a lot of diversity within institutions in the United States. You'll have some universities that are quite large with 40,000 people, and then you'll have smaller colleges which are quite small with 3,000 or lower. So you do get kind of variety in that. You also get variety very much in location, with universities based in large cities and actually become part of the city as such, or colleges or smaller universities in what we call college towns, where if you attend that university, the whole town is really based around the university, so it has a completely different feel. When it comes to public and private universities, the main difference is it's looking at the funding structure. So public universities are set up by the state to educate students within that state. So students from that state will automatically get a lower tuition than any student outside the state, which includes any student internationally. So from Australia or New Zealand, for example, it's that same cost whether you're not inside the state but still inside the US, or whether you're overseas. And that is because the taxpayers of that state essentially fund the universities. That's their main goal. Private institutions are funded by their own means. They have different forms of funding essentially, and the fees remain, if I understand it correctly, the same for students wherever they're applying. That's the main difference. State institutions, as has been mentioned throughout the week, especially in the financial aid presentation on Wednesday, may not have as much scholarship or financial aid opportunities for international students, but in general are usually a little bit cheaper, and they may offer different discounts to international students to encourage them to come. So always get in touch with the university in regards to that. Private institutions in general can be more expensive, however, do have larger scholarship funding available for students. And I'll pass it over to my colleagues if they have anything to add.
Katie, I'll jump in real quick and just say that for state institutions, oftentimes they're larger campuses. They can be in excess of 30,000 students on campus just for undergraduate. So if you're looking for a very vibrant, large student community, a bustling campus, the campus might be sprawled out across smaller campuses within a town and have a bus or transportation system to take you to and from the different buildings or facilities on campus. Oftentimes that is a very big draw for students. They want that type of campus, they want that type of community. And then traditionally private institutions, they can be a little bit on the smaller scale, not all the time, but many times it's a smaller campus, a little bit more intimate. The class sizes could be smaller, where the community it's on a private campus, and the students and the community will have a little bit more of an intimate being able to know each other, and the professor relationship is possibly a little bit more easier to manage. So if you're coming from a large country like Australia or New Zealand, it might not make a difference to you whether or not you're on a big campus or a small campus. It really comes down to personal choice and what you personally want, both for the community aspect, but also from the academic standpoint, how big your class structure will be, whether it's discussion-based classes, whether or not you'll be able to have that relationship with professors. So just something to keep in mind. And also where the campus is located in the United States is also a factor for your decision of what's a best fit for you.
I love that. It was a perfect segue to one of our next questions, which was, what should I be thinking about when researching institutions? And you've done a good job of setting up the scene for that. But I want to throw it over to Ron for some additional comments about maybe some other things to be thinking about when you're starting that research process. And if you have any hot tips on tools or where to start with the whole search process.
Thanks, Katie. This is actually a really big question. I think a lot of people think I just want to go to this really well-known, famous university that I've heard of. But we've heard a lot throughout the week about finding the institution that's the best fit for you. And there are a lot of different factors in that. Obviously, you want to go to a university that's going to offer the academic program that you're most interested in pursuing. But as we've mentioned a few times, there's a huge range in terms of the size of the institution, in terms of whether or not it's a public or private institution. Other factors would include liberal arts colleges, which are going to have a really strong focus on undergraduate education, but maybe not so much postgrad research opportunities. Whereas larger research institutions will have that opportunity to continue on and do postgrad degrees. You need to think about other things as well, like do you want to be a really long way from the coast, or do you need to be able to get your ocean fix every now and then? Do you want to be in a big city or in one of these smaller college towns? Are you prepared to be in an environment where you can have snow 4 or 5 or 6 months out of the year? So all of those different things are things that you should be thinking about as you're researching your options. There are so many options to choose from in the US, with over 4,000 colleges and universities to choose from. So lots of different physical environments and lots of different priorities that are set by those campuses themselves. The ethos of the campus that you're looking at going to can be a really important part of that decision.
That's exactly right. Thanks so much, Ron. I think that ultimately you should be seeking to find an institution that's a good match for you academically, but also socially and culturally as well. And oftentimes that could be a few different institutions as well. So have fun with the search process. I think that's actually, it was my favorite part, was getting to know all of the different types of institutions across the US. And it's almost like each institution has their very own personality. And you get to take some time to do some self-introspection and figure out what you like and what you don't like about this next phase in your academic journey. I think that there's some really fantastic ways now that you can get a good feel for a variety of institutions. And of course, social media is one of them. Definitely check out, Facebook. I think they all have pretty cool Instagrams and Snapchats now, lots of stories, even student ambassadors sharing their stories on those platforms as well. I think you can dig a little bit deeper as well to take a look at the student newspaper, if you can access an online version of that. Or sometimes campuses have their own radio stations as well, and you can tune into those online too. So that's a fun way to get a different side of that student experience and what you might expect out of that. Does anyone else have things to chime in about researching your options or tools to use?
Katie, one thing I would just say is for students that are looking at rankings is one resource that you can use to look at schools that obviously are of interest to you and also carry the major that you want to pursue. But it's not the end all and say all. We have almost 4,000 or over 4,000 accredited US institutions in the United States. And some of the smaller schools, or some of the schools that maybe you haven't heard of in the top rankings list, but yet still offer a quality academic experience. In addition to the range of community colleges that we have in the United States, there's really an option for every single type of student, from whether you need to build your academics a little bit stronger. Maybe or you're looking for cost saving. Community college might be an option for you for the first 2 years as you transfer those credits over to a 4-year degree granting institution. But just keep in mind that some of the smaller colleges and universities, they might also give you more opportunity to be involved in that school and on that campus, because there's not 30,000 students also trying to be involved in the club sports and the teams and the student group. So it might give you a little bit more flexibility to kind of be seen more on campus and be able to give you some greater opportunities to get involved. The other thing to keep in mind is the US is huge. It takes 3 days to drive from New York City over to the west coast of California. It's a 6-hour plane ride from East Coast to West Coast. So it's a very large country. With that being said, there's also differences in cost of living depending on where you are. So if you're looking at schools in New York City, not only are tuition costs something that you need to think about, but also your indirect costs, the cost of being able to find housing if you're going to live off campus, the cost of being able to buy bread and milk at the local grocery store. Our costs do change a little bit depending on which state, which city you're living in. And there are more expensive parts of the United States and lesser expensive parts of the United States, depending on where you are. So that's just one thing to keep in mind if affordability is on your radar, is a concern of yours. The cost of living for which city, which state you're in is something to consider.
Katie, can I just quickly add a fun component? Everyone likes playing games, and at least I like playing games. So I'm going to put a challenge out there to families and students that are with us today as well. Is that I would challenge you and find colleges to add to your list that you've never heard of before. So everyone knows the famous schools. There's probably 20 that everyone can sort of always list. So I would do a couple of things. I would play the alphabet game as we're moving up to school holidays again. So if you're in year 11, we expect you to probably still researching. So play the alphabet game. Go through the alphabet and see if you can add some new schools to that list, both liberal arts and 4 years, 4-year public colleges, and see what variation you build on your list. I would also play the 51 state game of the US colleges. And see what kind of different lists that can promote for you as well. If you're going to be a future student athlete or you're going to live in America, if the snow makes you very happy, then go to snow regions. If the snow is not going to make you so happy, then be careful on where you pick. So if you're a student and you say, I love New York, Samantha, and then in your next breath you say, but I hate the snow, then I'm going to say you haven't done very good research then. In regards to where that snow hits. So have fun with that challenge as well. And of course, reach out to EducationUSA and talk in your communities. What inevitably will happen, the more you talk, the more you'll hear about friends that'll say, oh, I know someone that did that, or I know someone that did that, and they can give you some great advice as well and help you through the process. Thanks, Katie.
Thanks so much, everyone. And just to quickly add to that as well, don't be afraid to ask to be put in touch with current students, and you might actually be able to speak with a current student from New Zealand or Australia at that particular campus. And the reason why I'm saying that is, at least from the New Zealand perspective, we have students studying in all 50 states and at more than 450 different institutions, which is a huge spread. And so you just never know. You might be able to connect with someone who can tell you the real story from a perspective that you can. I'm just hearing that Australia has all states as well. So there you go. In every US state, you can talk to a current Australian or New Zealander on campus, which is pretty cool, I think. So we've got a question coming through about what's going to be happening in terms of timelines for this year and next year. Would institutions delay starts for graduates of 2020? So if you're applying in this upcoming admission cycle, can new students request for institutions to defer course starts for 1 year? Who wants to take that one? Charles.
For me, so with the current situation, we are asking for students to have a bit of patience. As you are watching the news and seeing how the US is responding to the COVID-19 situation, US campuses are scrambling to identify what is going to be the best choice for them. And remember that we have a decentralized system in the United States. So each school, depending on where they are, what state, what the administration at that school thinks is the right choice, are making different decisions. So just have a little bit of patience, and the schools that you're looking at applying to, or if you're already accepted to a school, yes, you do have, well, in many cases, there are options to defer a semester or for the year, but we do want to encourage students to be in contact with the institutions that they've applied to, because there are options for you. Ideally, we would like you to start as as planned and continue your education, whether it's in person or virtual or a hybrid model for the fall semester coming up right now. That's going to change institution by institution. So students should check with their schools on procedures related to classes and health issues. Schools are going to be making the right decision that has their students' best interest in mind from a health and safety and security standpoint. So contact the school, be in touch with them, and you should be able to make the best decision for you and that institution. And if there's any questions about the recent news with the DHS SEVP announcement, obviously we want to wait a little bit more time to see what that actually means and how it could possibly be implemented in the US. But once again, the US institutions are going to have the best responses for your student concerns. So be in contact with them. If you have an SEVP or ICE question directly, you can always contact the department. But as soon as the schools have enough information, we will be, or they will be, reaching out to the students that are admitted there to be able to provide the best student support services that they can. So patience is key right now, and be in contact with your school. That's the best advice that I can give for the time being.
Perfect, thank you. So you can see the 5 steps to study on the screen, hopefully. And we have a question about postgraduate studies. So is it the same process if you are interested in pursuing a master's or a PhD or anything along those lines? So for that question, I might turn it over to Ron.
All right, thanks, Katie. I think as education advisors, one of the most common phrases we use is "it depends." The application process for postgrad programs is going to be a little bit different from undergraduate study, but there will be a lot of similarities as well. I think one of the similarities is that you may still be required to take a standardized test, such as the GRE or the GMAT, but there will be a wider variety of those standardized tests that you need to take into account depending on the specific subject that you're planning to study in the United States. And I think that also carries over in that when you're applying to do postgraduate study, you're usually applying directly to a program rather than just to the university in that broader sense. So you do need to be aware of the specific requirements to study business or management at a particular university at postgraduate level, or to study law, or to study medicine, or to study physics, or whatever else you might be interested in studying. So you probably have a little bit extra research to do to make sure that you're finding not only a university that's the right fit for you, but also a program that's the right fit for the postgraduate qualification and research that you want to achieve.
Perfect. Cheers, Ron. And that actually is a really great segue into another question we had, which was about studying law or medicine in the US. And I think this is a fantastic question because I speak to students all across the country who are interested in these areas, and especially with law students in New Zealand, I think it's really interesting because about half of them, from what I understand, who study law in New Zealand don't actually have the intent of becoming a lawyer. So that is something to have in the back of your mind as you are starting this research process. And for those students, I really encourage them to be thinking about maybe liberal arts or institutions where you can go and have a little bit more time to explore a wide variety of subject areas before really honing in on what you might like to do and pursue as your actual major. But I might get Sarah back into the conversation to talk a little bit more about law school and medical school in the US and what that journey looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Katie. So one of the most important things that I tell students, because we get these questions quite often as well, is law and medicine are postgraduate entry in the United States, which is not the case here in Australia. So here in Australia, and I'll let the New Zealand team refer to New Zealand afterwards, you can go straight into a medicine degree or a law degree at bachelor level. Usually they're longer degrees and have postgraduate components as well, but you can start that straight off. In the US, that's not the case. You do need to do an undergraduate degree first, and it can be an undergraduate or should be an undergraduate degree in a relevant field. Or a relevant major. So if you want to go into medicine, obviously something in the relevant sciences, and if you want to go into law, a really broad education and legal studies in general would be helpful for that. The other thing I do mention to Australian students, and it does go back to what Katie said about do you want to be a lawyer if you're going to study law, is the different legal systems between our countries may create difficulties for you if you study a law degree in the United States and then would like to practice law here in Australia. So if you would like to practice law in Australia or New Zealand, I'll let them refer after, it's beneficial possibly to do an undergraduate degree in the US in a variety of disciplines, and then possibly your postgraduate in law in Australia, or do a bridging course after finishing a law degree in the US so you can practice as a lawyer in Australia. And I'll give it back to you, Katie or Ron, to refer on if that's similar with New Zealand.
Yeah, the situation is very similar. Thanks, Sarah. And I think it is important to remember that, a lot of students here in New Zealand do law as part of their undergraduate program, or do a dual degree that includes a law degree as part of their undergraduate program. In the US, that's not going to be an option. There are a lot of universities and colleges in the US that may offer at undergraduate level pre-law or pre-med programs. So you can start on your path towards those postgraduate qualifications during your undergraduate degree, but you won't end up with a law degree or a medical degree as an undergraduate. So yeah, the situation is very similar. And I think expanding that a little bit further as well, if you're looking at other fields which require professional certification to practice in your home country, you do need to check that out and make sure that the qualification you're getting in the US is going to be transferable back to New Zealand or Australia or wherever you'll be going home to.
Perfect. Thanks, everyone. And we are actually getting to the close of our session today. And before we wrap it all up, I just want to ask my fellow advisors here if they have any final comments or information they'd like to share.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. This is Samantha coming to you from Melbourne. We want to be dream builders with you, not dream crushers, but we will give you the right information and the right advice. So never feel afraid to reach out and come to us. We know that as a family, this takes an extra investment from you all in regards to the processes. But we can clearly make that as simple as possible for you. And then don't forget, all of us that that have joined you today, we are well networked with your schools. And if we're not networked with your schools yet, let us know. We're responsible for regions in our own country. We are happy to connect with you and the school to make that process simple as well. So keep on going with this aspiration. Katie is obviously an American and obviously educated in America. I'm an Australian that was a former student athlete there as well. The options are purely brilliant. And we would love to continue supporting you as much as we can. So thanks, everyone, and thanks, Katie.
Great. Well, thank you so much for tuning in to our last session of Education USA Virtual Week. If you happen to miss our earlier sessions, you can watch recordings on our Facebook pages. Please follow our hashtag, which is #EduUSA Virtual Week, to learn more about the institutions that have participated in our program throughout the week. If you have any future questions, please get in touch with your local Education USA center. You can see our contact details there on the screen. You can also contact us through our Facebook pages and learn more by visiting educationusa.state.gov. Thanks so much for watching, and we look forward to staying in touch.